Welcome to Inkhaven Presents, Readings from the Archive. I'm Ben Pace, I'm the host. On this show, I invite writers from the internet who I respect and admire and read to bring themselves an essay that they read and love that stirs their hearts or has influenced them greatly. They read it to us and then we have a short discussion about it. My guest today is John Nerst. John's a researcher of disagreements, why they form, how our individual psychologies give rise to our beliefs. He's been writing on his blog Everything Studies since 2016, with over 100 posts there, also powered by WordPress.com. I first discovered him due to his thoughtful and extensive analysis of a conflict and debate between Sam Harris and Ezra Klein in 2018, where he noted, I think, a key difference in their perspectives as being the willingness and desire to decouple, to cognitively decouple, to isolate or detach a point of discussion from its context and analyze it entirely on its own terms. He was blogging there, and then since 2023, he's taken a leave of absence from the blog to compile his research into this book, Competitive Sense Making, an upgrade to common sense on disagreement. John, thank you very much for joining me today.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Good. And what have you brought for us to read?
You mentioned the idea of cognitive decoupling, and that actually made it into that article because I happened to read a specific blog post just as I was doing the research and the processing for the article you mentioned.
Lovely. And so that's what you'll read for us today.
Yes.
Great. Do we need any particular context before going in, or will we understand it from hearing?
I think it will speak for itself.
Wonderful. All right. Well, then let's listen to that.
From the blog Dross Bucket, The Cognitive Decoupling Elite, April 8th, 2018, by Lucy Keir. Starting note. Taking something speculative, running with it, piling on some more speculative stuff. In an interesting post, linked to a blog post called Do Rationalists Exist? Summarizing her exploration of the literature on rational thinking, Sarah Constantin introduces the idea of a cognitive decoupling elite. Quote, Stanovich talks about cognitive decoupling, the ability to block out context and experiential knowledge and just follow formal rules, as a main component of both performance on intelligence tests and performance on the cognitive bias tests that correlate with intelligence. Cognitive decoupling is the opposite of holistic thinking. It's the ability to separate, to view things in the abstract, to play devil's advocate. Speculatively, we might imagine that there's a cognitive decoupling elite of smart people who are good at probabilistic reasoning and score high on the cognitive reflection test and the IQ-correlated cognitive bias tests. End quote. It's certainly very plausible to me that something like this exists as a distinct personality cluster. It seems to be one of the features of my own favorite classification pattern, linked to a Left Wrong post called Two Types of Mathematician. For example, as a component of the algebra systematizing step-by-step explicit side. Not the whole thing, though. For this post, I'm just going to take it as a given for now that cognitive decoupling is a real thing, that people can be more or less good at, and build on that assumption and see what I get. It's been a good few decades for cognitive decoupling, from an employment point of view at least. Maybe a good couple of centuries taking the long view. But in particular, the rise of automation by software has created an enormous wealth of opportunities for people who can abstract out the formal, symbolic exoskeleton of a process to the point where they can make a computer do it. There's also plenty of work in the interstices between systems, defining interfaces and making sure data is clean enough to process. The kind of jobs Venkatesh Rao memorably described as intestinal flora in the body of technology, linked to a Ribbon Farm post. I personally have a complicated and conflicted relationship with cognitive decoupling. Well, to be honest, sometimes a downright petty and resentful relationship. I'm not a true member of the elite myself, despite having all the right surface qualifications. Undergrad maths degree, PhD in physics, working as a programmer. Maybe cognitive decoupling precariat at a push. Despite making my living in the majority of my friends in cognitive decoupling heavy domains, I mostly find step-by-step, decontextualized reasoning difficult and unpleasant at a fundamental, maybe even perceptual level. The clearest way of explaining this, for those who don't already have a gut understanding what I mean, might be to describe something like the opposite of cognitive decoupling. The cognitive strong coupling regime, perhaps? I had this vague memory that Sylvia Plath's character Esther in The Bell Jar voiced something in the area of what I wanted, in the description of a hated physics class that had stuck in my mind as somehow connected to my own experience. I reread the passage and was surprised to find that it wasn't just vaguely what I wanted, it was exactly what I wanted. A precise and detailed account of what just feels wrong about cognitive decoupling. Quote, "Botany was fine because I loved cutting up leaves and putting them under the microscope and drawing diagrams of bread mold and the odd heart-shaped leaf in the sex cycle of the fern. It seemed so real to me. The day I went into physics class, it was death. A short, dark man with a high lisping voice, named Mr. Manzi, stood in front of the class in a tight blue suit holding a little wooden ball. He put the ball on a steep grooved slide and let it run down to the bottom. Then he started talking about let A equal acceleration and let T equal time, and suddenly he was scribbling letters and numbers and equal signs all over the blackboard, and my mind went dead. I may have made straight A in physics, but I was panic-struck. Physics made me sick the whole time I learned it. What I couldn't stand was the shrinking everything into letters and numbers. Instead of leaf shapes and large diagrams of the hole the leaves breathe through, and fascinating words like carotene and xanthophyll on the blackboard, there were these hideous, cramped, scorpion-lettered formulas in Mr. Manzi's special red chalk. I knew chemistry would be worse, because I'd seen a big chart of the 90-odd elements hung up in the chemistry lab, and all the perfectly good words like gold and silver and cobalt and aluminium were shortened to ugly abbreviations with different decimal numbers after them. If I had to strain my brain with any more of that stuff, I would go mad. I would fail outright. It was only by a horrible effort of will that I had dragged myself through the first half of the year." End quote. This is a much, much stronger reaction than the one I have, but I absolutely recognize this emotional state. The botany class is ground out in vivid, concrete experience. Ferns, leaf shapes, bread mold. There's an associated technical vocabulary, carotene, xanthophyll, but even these words are embedded in a rich web of sound associations and tangible meanings. In the physics and chemistry classes, by contrast, the symbols are seemingly arbitrary, chosen on pure pragmatic grounds and interchangeable for any other random symbol. Now I say seemingly arbitrary because, of course, if you continue in physics, you do build up a rich web of associations with X and T and the rest of them. Esther doesn't know this, though. The important content of the lecture is instead the structural relationships between the different symbols, and the way of transforming one to another by formal rules. Pure cognitive decoupling. There is a tangible physical object, the little wooden ball, better than I got in my university mechanics lectures. But that object has been chosen for its utter lack of vivid distinguishing features, its ability to stand in as a prototype of the whole abstract class of featureless spheres, rolling down featureless inclined planes. The lecturer's suit is a bit crap too. Nothing at all about this situation has been designed for a fulfilling, interconnected aesthetic experience. I think it's fairly obvious from the passage, but it seems to be worth pointing out anyway. Strong cognitive coupling doesn't just equate to stupidity, or lack of cognitive flexibility. For one thing, Esther gets an A anyway. For another, she's able to give very perceptive, detailed descriptions of subtle features of her experience, always hugging close to the specificity of raw experience, the odd heart-shaped leaf in the sex cycle of the fern, rather than generic concepts that can be overlaid onto many observations. Okay, it's another sphere on an inclined plane. Strong coupling in this sense is like being a kind of sensitive antenna for your environment, learning to read as much meaning out of it as possible. Link to one of her own blog posts. But without necessarily being able to explain what you learn in a structured, explicit, logical argument. I'd expect it to be correlated with high sensitivity to nonverbal cues, implicit tone, tacit understanding, all the kind of stuff that poets are stereotypically good at, and nerds are stereotypically bad at. I don't normally talk about my own dislike for cognitive decoupling. It's way too easy to sound unbearably precious and snowflakey. Oh, my tastes are far too sophisticated to bear contact with this clunky nerd stuff. In practice, I just shut up and try to get on with it as far as I can. Organized systems are what keep the world functioning, and whining about them is mostly pointless. Also, I'm nowhere near the extreme end of this spectrum anyway, and can cope most of the time. When I was studying maths and physics, I didn't even have to worry about this for the most part. You can compensate fairly well for a lack of ability in decoupled formal reasoning by just understanding the domain. This is very manageable, particularly if you pick your field well, because the same few ideas, like calculus, linear algebra, the harmonic oscillator, crop up again and again and again and have very tangible physical interpretations. So there's always something concrete to ground out the symbols with. This wasn't a conscious strategy because I had no idea what was happening at the time. I just knew since I was a kid that I was good at maths, apart from some inexplicable occasions where I was instead very bad at maths, and just tried to steer towards the good at maths bits as much as possible. This is my attempt to finally make sense out of it. It's been more of an issue since. Most STEM-type jobs outside of academia are pretty hard going, because the main objective is to get the job done, and you often don't have time to build up a good picture of the overall domain. So you're more reliant on the step-by-step systematic thing. A particularly annoying example would be something like implementing the business logic for a large enterprise CRUD app, where you have no particularly strong domain knowledge. Maybe there's a tax of 7% on 12 widgets, or maybe it's a tax of 11.5% on 500 widgets. Either way, what it means for you personally is that you're going to chuck some decontextualized variables around according to the rules defined in some document, with no vivid sensory understanding of exactly what these widgets look like and why they're being taxed. There's basically no way that Esther in the bell jar could keep her sanity in a job like that, even if she has the basic cognitive capacity to do it. Absolutely everything about it is viscerally wrong, wrong, wrong. My current job is rather close to this end of the spectrum, and it's a strain to work in this way, in a way many other colleagues don't seem to experience. This is where the downright petty and resentful bit comes in. I'd like it if there was a bit more acknowledgement from people who find cognitive decoupling easy and natural, that it is in fact a difficult mode of thought for many of us, and one that most modern jobs dump us into far more than we'd like. From the other side, I'm sure that the decouplers would also appreciate it if we stopped chucking around words like inhuman and robotic, and did a bit less hating on decontextualized systems that keep the world running, even if they feel bad from the inside. I think some of this stuff is coming from a similar emotional place to my own petty resentment, but it's not at all helpful for any actual communication between the sides. I'm seeing a few encouraging examples of the kind of communication I would like. Sarah Constantin looks to be in something like a symmetric position to me on the other side of the bridge, with her first loyalty to explicit systematic reasoning, but enough genuine appreciation to be able to write thoughtful explorations of the other side. Linked to a blog post called Naming the Nameless. A quote, "I think it's much better to try to make the implicit explicit, to bring cultural dynamics into the light and understand how they work, rather than to hide from them." David Chapman has started to write about how the context-heavy sort of learning, reasonableness, works, aimed at something like the cognitive decoupling elite, linked to one of his posts. Quote, "In summary, reasonableness works because it is context-dependent, purpose-laden, interactive, and tacit. The ways it uses language are effective for exactly the reason rationality considers ordinary language defective: nebulosity." And then there's all the wonderful work by people like Brett Victor, linked to one of his posts, who are working to open up subjects like maths and programming for people like me who need to see things if we're going to have hope of doing them. I hope this post at least manages to convey something of the flavor of strong cognitive coupling to those who find decoupling easy. So, if the thing I'm trying to point at still looks unclear, please let me know in the comments.
All right. Well, thanks very much for reading that. I really enjoyed listening to it. You are the first person who read a thing where I did not have to ask you to slow down during the reading. Yeah, I mean, I really love the essay. I always remember Dross Bucket on early Less Wrong 2.0. I always loved when she submitted new posts. But yeah, please tell me what made you choose this one for the podcast today.
Well, part of the brief was something that has had a lot of impact on me, and this one had an impact on me like in two ways, both like psychologically, like I've started to think in these terms a lot, and then also it had the impact on the article that I was writing at the time, the discussion of the Sam Harris Ezra Klein conflict, and this concept made it into that article because I read this one when I was writing that, and it clicked. Everything fell into place with that. So I added that idea to the end of the Harris Klein article. And I think that's what most people took with them away from that article. I don't know how successful it would have been if I hadn't added that on. So it's had a big importance for me.
Yeah, and I should say for anyone listening, the concept of high and low decouplers has become ubiquitous in certainly my rationalist subculture that I live in, since that article of yours. Yeah, had you been reading much others of Dross Buckets at the time? Had you been following her blog, or was that the first one you?
No, I think I don't remember. It was quite some time ago now, but I don't think I had read anything from her before. I think that was the first one.
Gotcha. I had already read, if I get the order right, she had a fantastic essay on Less Wrong about the bat and the ball problem from Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah.
You know, the standard rationality question that everyone gets wrong. A bat and a ball costs $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? And just the majority of people, I believe, when asked that, will say 10 cents. But if you add $1 to 10 cents, you get $1.10. And if that's the price of the bat and the ball is 10 cents, and the combination would be $1.20. Anyway, so Kahneman would use this as an example of people getting things wrong. But I remember Dross Bucket's article being like, what are they thinking? What is going on in their heads when they're doing this math? And she would find comment sections where people would explain it, and she would just analyze it. I had forgotten about that till rereading this, but that was that really affected my thinking of that problem. And the linked post, she links about two types of mathematicians: the kind of geometric, intuitional kind of people, and the very explicit algebraic kind of people. Have you heard of the corn eating hypothesis?
I have heard of it. I have also heard that it has been debunked.
Yes, it may well not be accurate, but I recall it being very much in the time trying to find these interesting splits in the psychology of the technical people. And then she does this wonderful analysis here of the piece of literature by The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. Yeah, I really agree with it. She really expanded on that in a bunch of ways. Yeah, I like the observation that not only is the work that the physicists are doing very abstract, but he doesn't have very good clothes, and there's nothing interesting in the room. There's one object, a ball, which has been optimized to have as few interesting properties as possible. Yeah, it really gave me a sense into this world that I think, as you would agree, is not written very well about this perspective of she's very accomplished technically, but doesn't quite like the world. Is that what landed with you when you were reading it, or was it?
Well, this is sort of catnip to me because I like these two things, which is like what different ideas do people have about how and why do they disagree, and on the other hand, how does this connect to differences in internal experience? How do people really experience the inside of their own heads? And that's something that we just tend to take for granted, that everyone else has insides of heads that are the same as our own. And then we get frustrated when people don't act the way we expect them to act. So I really love reading about people who experience the world and experience their own mind in ways that are different from me, from my way. And they say it explicitly. They don't just assume it and think that other people are broken when they're not the same way.
Yeah.
And so articles where people say, this is how I experience the world. I have this reaction to this, and it feels like this. I think that's tremendously helpful. It's very interesting and helpful.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's a big part of my book, I think that this kind of difference, not just this, but differences like this, are very, very important for how we form our opinions about things, what things should be like, what's good and bad, what's important and not important. Because she discusses that a little bit in the piece as well, that there's I don't know about low level, but there's a certain ambient hostility between people who think in different ways, maybe who are eager to cognitively decouple and those who
Yeah.
don't. And if you don't approach such a difference with very much understanding and respect, you very easily get hostility. And I think a lot of the hostilities that exist between people of different temperaments could possibly be improved if people really tried to understand that people really experience things differently in a very, very deep sense, almost on a physiological level.
Yeah, now that you say that, I realize someone was telling me the other day that someone they knew who I like was using the phrase low decoupler as an insult.
Yes, that's part of the reason I am a bit. I was a little bit ambivalent with how this article was received. I thought
Yeah.
people sort of over applied it a little bit. I think I admitted that I said it was like speculative and I'm just thinking out loud. And also when I wrote that, I had a very, very small audience and I wasn't used to anyone really listening or
Yeah, that
taking it
happens.
said seriously. So I was a little bit like, oh my God, what's happening? This is like out of my control now.
Yeah.
And that was like the first time and it was a bit frightening. And when people use it as an insult and when other people think it's obviously an insult to, that makes me a little sad because I really like put that there because I didn't want to accuse anyone of being dishonest or being stupid or whatever it was. I wanted to say that, well, people have different norms in different contexts where you think there are different standards for how to reason and what counts as an argument and what counts as relevant.
And I think the piece gives me much more sympathy to that perspective. I think I think the perspective being, oh, you seem to not be able to like set aside irrelevant information, but I get a sense of from Sylvia Plath of like just constantly being exposed to all of this incoming data and not being able to tune it out and being very aware of it and being able to notice things in it that I might not have noticed otherwise. It's not always the case that the thing that's not being explicitly discussed is irrelevant to the question. And someone who is more absorbing all of the sense data and very high contextualizing may occasionally notice patterns that I'm not paying attention to because it's not the explicit conversational subject. So yeah, it gave me more sympathy to it, certainly. I just want to go back to a thing you mentioned about your essay being, you were like, oh, not too many people read my blog. And then that one essay came out. A lot of people read it. Do you have any recollection of the numbers of like views on that post relative to others?
I don't know. I haven't.
I assume it was at least in the tens of thousands.
Yes, I think that one and my most popular one has, I don't know, a few tens of thousands.
Cool.
I haven't checked for a very long time, and they do get a fairly decent trickle.
Yeah.
For years.
It's been a somewhat common enough experience at Inkhaven, or not uncommon, I'll say. I think Jen last Inkhaven said she enjoys thinking of her blog as just a thing a few of her friends read. But unfortunately, the analytics graph showed one post with 80,000 views and one with 60,000 views. And she was almost annoyed at the person who had linked to it on Hacker News, being like, I didn't want people to read it. And then she realized, oh, I did want people to read it. And she's having to come to grips with a similar thing. And now I believe CBS Canada is doing a radio hour based on the two essays that she wrote.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's funny. I had an opportunity to actually appear on British radio to talk about the once, but I couldn't do it because I had actually been to the United States and came back exactly on that day, so I was jet lagged out of my mind, and I just couldn't.
Right.
There's one section in the book as well where I talk about how people experiences their own will differently. Like your desires and motivations, they might be very clear and straightforward. I know what I want. I know what I like and not. But apparently, it seems to me, not everyone experiences their own wills and desires as clearly. A lot of people can experience like social social pressure or social influences much more strongly than I do. To me, it's just something that I barely experience it, to be honest. And therefore, I think that people tend to exaggerate when they say, oh, there's so much social pressure for this and that. But I've come to understand that some people might just see it and hear it and perceive it much more strongly. And experiences their own, and then therefore experience their own relationship to the social environment differently.
Yeah, I think I've changed. I think the fun things about these is I've changed my experience of them over time. I think as a teenager, I used to have a very kind of visceral sense of the winds of fashion around me. That if someone would say something, I'd be like, oh, now there's certain things I cannot say, otherwise I will cause a conflict, or I can't even state an opinion, otherwise something's going to happen. And then in my later years, I practiced being disagreeable more and found that it went okay. And now I pay less attention to such things. But it's changed for me a lot.
It's funny that you say that. I think I've done it the other way. I was much more disagreeable when I was younger.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah.
So one more thing, unless you have another
Please.
question. You were talking about how Lucy Drossbucket,
Yes.
she was taking the perspective regarding the bat and ball problem.
Yes.
That, okay, people aren't just doing it wrong. What are they doing? What exactly are they doing right? Or what is the process that is actually going? That's also very, very important thing, I think. Anna discussed it in the book as well. Historically, all those deviations from what we would consider perfect rationality, basically all the way that public discourse is not like a philosophy seminar, has been considered to be just irrationality or just wrong or just failing to be rational. But more recently, we've been better at understanding it's not just random failures. We don't have this rationality that just fails for no adequately explained reason here and there. It's actually doing something else. So what is it doing right? Why is it working this way and not the way we imagine it to be working? And I think we've been very, very bad at understanding that historically, because all the people who have wanted to make explicit accounts of how things work, they've been the philosopher scientist types who have been very much, well, the decoupler type, or the type who likes very explicit formal systems, things like that. And therefore have been, I don't know if uninterested, but they have been disdainful or uninterested in other ways of thinking, modes of thinking. I kind of think it's like a bit like the difference between analytical and continental philosophy, because the analyticals tend to basically disdain the continental tradition because they won't say outright what they mean. They won't phrase their philosophy in like clear logical propositions and things like that, which the analyticals like. And then the continentals are disdainful back because they think that the analyticals are too rigorous, too stiff, too narrow, too autistic maybe, and they like to write things that are more holistic, and you're supposed to like just take it in as an impression, and they want to communicate their insights and truths in ways that are ineffable, in a way, more artistic. And one way you could see that is that they're just failing to be rational. But there's also the case that if you do that, you're just going to take a big chunk of humanity, maybe the majority, and just say that the way they work is just wrong, and it's just a failure to be rational. And I don't think that's true. I think that's also something that this other way of thinking that is not formal and rational, but more kind of impressionistic and associative, is also something that we should be studying in detail and understand how it works on its own terms, not just what it fails to do.
I personally lean more in the analytic sense. Is it has some benefits of being very like, you can take a single piece of it, you can examine that piece for like internal consistency. You can see whether the claims are true or false without having to like be awash in a whole entire book's worth of like meaning and association and so forth. And so it has some like, especially for a larger like body of people who are trying to work on things, it is easier to take apart piece by piece.
Oh, I very much prefer it too. I just feel like you want to take that approach of being very specific about things and also apply it to things that aren't like that themselves, and try to figure out what makes this system tick, even if it isn't very systematic.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you had any success? Have you been reading more continental philosophy in recent years?
I don't think that's for reading. I think that's more for reading about. I like to explain the differences, and I have I think my second to last chapter is a sort of a taxonomy of the kind of ways that people link different ideas together. I think from an analytical point of view or a decoupler point of view, there are basically two legitimate ways to link together ideas. and that would be logical. This strictly implies this, or it would be causal. This thing causes this thing, like in reality.
Mm-hmm.
But for but you'd call them coupler or contextual or even the artistic or the continental tradition, whatever you'd call it. There are many other ways to legitimately link things together, like they're historically related, or there's some symbolic connection, or they're structurally similar in some way, or there's an aesthetic similarity, or there's a social link because it's the same people who like both things, and all these kinds of basically you can also, in this perspective, you can accept any kind of connection between two things, not just strictly logical or a causal connection. And I don't think that actually works as arguments, but it is still something you should understand what the thought is, what you're trying to do when people do that. Even though I think many who make that sort of argument, they don't understand how unconvincing it is to others who don't agree with them. It's sometimes when you make an argument, I think that's, what was it? Yeah, there's one argument that I find was really funny when someone says that classical symphonies are a fascist form of music because it has a conductor and it's very regimented and like controlled from the top, while jazz music is a liberal form of music because it involves improvisation by this individual performer. And that's a sort of structural similarity. So they try to build a story where things are similar in some way because of this very abstract similarity. And then if you try to use that as an argument, like jazz is good, Beethoven is bad, that might sound very insightful to someone who already agrees with it or want to agree with it, but extremely silly and pointless and far-fetched to someone who doesn't. And actually that form of argument then contributes to polarization, because those who are prone to agreeing with it, they feel it's been as insightful, but of course the other side, they're too stupid to understand the subtlety and poetry of the connection. And those who disagree with it just think, is this the strongest you've got? That's ridiculous. I mean, you don't have any better arguments than that, and then people are just further away from it.
Yeah. I mean, seems interesting as a way of illustrating a perspective or a value system. I think if you listen to Shostakovich's symphonies written in the USSR under relatively fascist kinds of situations, I think you'll be able to find ways that he's able to rebel against such political ideologies in the form of a symphony.
Oh, that's in that case there is genuine intent.
Yes,
it's not a similarity that is derived purely from this abstract structural similarity.
Right.
It's quite a different thing.
True. So yeah, I think you'd been blogging for like a year, 2 years by that point or so about disagreements and your interest in them.
Yeah, about 2 years.
Was that the first time you'd come across the concept?
Yes, actually, that article by Trosbacher was the first time I had ever heard it.
I think I wanted to just give a slight history of the concept. I think it was first mentioned, I think, in 1987 in a paper by Alan M. Leslie from the University of London, in their paper on the pretense and representation and the origins of theory of mind, where they would describe, like, having a world model and a representation of that world and that the interaction. But then they were talking about children, playing imaginary games or having imaginary friends. And they would say from the primary representation, they would make a meta representation, a decoupled copy, and that would lead to action, but in pretend play. And so I think that was the first concept. And then I think it was continued with Nichols and Stitch in their '03 academic book on mind reading, an integrated account of pretense, self-awareness, and the understanding of others' minds. And they talked about cognitive quarantine, taking a part of your world model and then separating it from everything else and just being able to play with it there. I first came across it in Keith Stanovich's writing, which Sarah mentions there. I did bring along my teenage copy of his 2011 book, Rationality and the Reflective Mind, which talks about it extensively. I'm curious how you think of the separation between decoupling and contextualizing, how you cleanly would like separate it in your own thinking.
Well, I'd heard about Leslie only
Oh, okay.
before. I went back to study it a little bit, what Stanovich had written
Yeah.
before, so I could give it its proper discussion in the book more than I had done in the original article. How do I look at separating it? Well, I've obviously been sort of wrestling with this a lot. After the Harris Klein article, I wrote another one called Decoupling Revisited, when I sort of worked it out more and discussed it more. And I feel quite good that people often link to that one and not the original one, because it discusses things in a little bit more nuance. Once I understood that people were going to read this,
Yes.
more people than just a few. But then again, I realize, and the second last chapter in the book is called Family and Empire, and that's because decoupling is not just necessarily one thing, but more like a family of things in the Wittgensteinian sense. But it's also an empire, because I realize that once you start thinking about things this way, you separate between the strictly formal, the logical, the sort of individual, mechanistic almost thinking, and then this loose and associative and essentially social kind of thinking. If you separate them into two things, then there are so many things it applies to. You can basically just project it onto almost anything. Almost anything in the book can be thought of as an instance of this. And that made me think, maybe I'm over applying this. Maybe I'm kind of losing my mind and I'm using this too much. Maybe I'm going too much galaxy brain with this idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that if all these examples that I bring up, if they're not convincing, then maybe just think of this as a description of what it feels like to like lose your mind and go nuts with something. So I don't know. I mean, there are many things that are partially similar to each other, but they're not exactly similar. Well, they're not exactly the same, and it's very difficult for us to deal with that. We either want to treat something as, oh well, this is the same thing, or these are completely different things. It's hard to say. It's hard to model in our minds things that are kind of overlapping a little bit. And I think this idea, it is relevant for a lot of things, but it's not exactly the same. I discussed like things like ask and guess culture.
Yep.
Where you assume a lot from the context, or you just listen strictly to what people say. It also has to do with this, but it's not exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So
if you're anyone listening, the ask culture is where if you wish to ask someone for something, then that is acceptable. They can decline if they do not wish for it, or they can accept it, and that's free action. And in the guess culture, you only ask if you expect that they would like to give it to you, and to ask otherwise is a slight social faux pas or an imposition.
Yeah.
And then we get to fewer complicated negotiations, because all the negotiations are done when they're expected to work out, rather than all of the other times.
Thank you. Yeah, but there are lots of situations where there's a contrast between straightforward explicitness and this heavy context implicitness. Excuse me. So it does seem to be relevant to a lot of things, but you don't want to reduce everything to it, because that makes you kind of that makes you a monomaniac, sort of. Everything is about my pet idea, and I want to avoid that. So it is an idea with very sort of expansionist tendencies, and I try to be careful about that.
All right. Nonetheless, I'm going to ask some follow-ups.
Yeah.
Do you think do you come to find that do you come to believe that it's mostly temperament or culture that affects people's choice or ability to couple in a certain situation?
It depends on how much the culture varies. I mean, if you're in a similar culture, then the temperament's going to be most important. But if you take people, put them in very different cultures, then obviously the culture is going to be more important. I know that's not a very it's not a very good answer, but I think people tend to self-select into cultures that like reinforce and validate their internal temperamental predilections.
Do you have an example of that?
Yeah, well, mathematicians or programmers, for example,
Right.
they are people who like to think in a certain way,
I suspect
and then they find themselves in a culture that also values that, and it gets reinforced.
many of the
Mhm.
mathematicians are not super hyper aware of the poor quality of the coat of their professors.
Oh, I guess. I mean, if you are, that's actually a good example. If you're more likely to notice when someone isn't dressing very well, you're probably less likely to find yourself at a mathematics institution, and probably more likely to find yourself somewhere else. But then again, I mean, there are obviously in the world there are more high context and low context cultures in general. So people are also trained to think more or less about specific contextual clues.
Yeah.
And that's another facet of it. So
Do you view a lot of, or how much of sort of disagreement, political disagreement, do you view as differences in choices about when to decouple versus simple object level
yeah,
disagreement?
whether you're supposed to apply this to politics or not, that's like a big question. People liked it. People liked that I did that. A lot of people found it very, very illuminating. I still don't know if it's really good, because there were also some criticisms saying that people don't really think like this across the board or not. I think in terms of politics, whether you should decouple something or whether you should think about it in terms of aesthetics and associations, I think that is very often a component of specific political disagreements. But I'm less certain that it is, for the most part, something that people do across the board. I don't think there are many people who think that, oh, we should always decouple everything, or you should never decouple anything, because we're often strategic in our reasoning, and often we tend to pick the position that helps us the most in any given situation.
Yeah.
Like, it's an opportunistic practice to say that, oh, you can't separate these two things, or you must separate these two things. Then again, I also think there are people who have certain personalities that make them lean consistently in one direction. I mean, I know I do. So it's a little of both. I know that's the boring answer.
I think it's fair in the Harris Klein situation to think that while I think on that particular topic that we were discussing, Klein was pushing for a contextual approach and Harris was pushing for a decoupled approach. That is not to, while there is definitely, I mean, I don't obviously see Harris as fundamentally personality, psychologically far more disposed to decoupling. I think I would a little, but my guess is in other situations they would make different. The two of them would make different.
Yes, I think they probably would, and I think they're both capable of both.
Yes, certainly.
I did discuss that they have slightly different backgrounds. Harris is they're a neuroscientist, and Klein's like a political strategist.
But
obviously that matters, but I think yes, they are capable of being both.
As much as that gives some information about what kind of psychologies were selected for, it also gives some amount of information, perhaps more so, about what cultures they think are supposed to be applied to the conversation at hand.
Yeah, I think that's part of why I think reading their exchange carefully, I think Klein was genuinely surprised at how upset Harris was, because I believe that he thought some of the rhetoric that he brought up was just, well, it's just how things are done.
Yeah.
This is how this works. This is standard. Why are you upset about this? This is pretty mild, things like that.
Yeah.
And Harris was very angry about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a bit of a cultural difference.
One question that I wanted to wonder, I mean, I guess you've read this in preparation for your book as well, but in reading it today, was there anything about it that stood out to you differently than when you had read it originally? Was there any part of it that landed differently with you?
No, I don't think it landed differently. I think it sort of almost slotted into my psychology the first time I read it, like a key into a whole. Specifically this idea, I think that the part when she said the opposite of decoupling is to have very sensitive social antenna. Like you're very sensitive to cues and tone and things like that. And I realized that that's a personality difference, and I'm quite a lot of the on the other end of that. And therefore it was interesting to get a sense of what it's like to experience all these. I mean, I used to think that when people were talking about social cues and things, it was very simple to just not look for them, and then you wouldn't perceive them. but a lot of people just perceive things involuntarily that I don't really perceive unless I try. If you understand what I mean.
Yep. You've flown out here for Inkhaven.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's been great having you around, all the way from Sweden, with your family, who've been lovely to get to know. Curious whether anything about being at Inkhaven has surprised you, whether it is what you anticipated.
It's pretty close to what I anticipated. I am a little surprised at how diligent people are. There are more than 50 people here.
Yeah.
And it's very, very calm. Even at night, people are writing, and they're writing all day, and they're very I mean, I would expect with there's so many young people, I would expect them to be more rowdy than they are, but people are very, very diligent with their work.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, it's an odd selection effect. I think someone was expecting everyone to be very rationalist and very kind of psychologically decoupling and nerdy, and was surprised to find, there's a lovely lady here who submitted just a play and some poems that she'd written that were fantastic. And I think she was one of the people up late the other evening reading Shakespeare whilst baking.
It's 12th night. I actually they lost to Olivia for a few minutes, and I had to jump in and do a couple of lines.
Great,
wonderful. I hope I did it well.
So thanks so much for coming. I really appreciate being on the podcast and discussing this with us. It was lovely to read this essay. Oh yeah, you're welcome. It was a lovely essay to read. So thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you.
Farewell for now. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to thank our sponsor for this episode, WordPress.com. As a teenager, many of the blogs I grew up reading were built using WordPress, such as Slatestar Codex, Don't Worry About the Vase, and Shtetl Optimized. The co-founder of WordPress, Matt Mullenweg, went on to build WordPress.com, a hosting service that supports bloggers. It provides an interface that allows you to design your website and to use the near infinite family of libraries and plugins that have been built for WordPress. If you're someone who cares to be able to design your own blog, for your ideas, for your writing, and for your own aesthetic, then by far one of the best options on the internet today is WordPress.com.